to the extent that we usually at least place restrictions on people harming others. And so if our beliefs are connected to our actions, we're going to want to take a look at those, right? Even if other people aren't judging them, to make sure that we ourselves are making sure we're proud of the things that we believe, and thus the things that we do. And so through that, to that end, we're going to be constructing and critiquing arguments, right? So constructing our own arguments, learning how to reconstruct other people's arguments, learning how to critique others as well as our own, right? Again, for the purpose of scrutinizing our foundational assumptions to arrive, hopefully, potentially, at some sort of truth. So philosophy's norms, again, as I mentioned in the case of arguing, can be different from some of the things we might encounter every day, in that philosophy, again, requires us to ask challenging questions. But as I noted before, this is a sign of respect, not of insult. But more importantly than asking those questions is listening to the response. I'm sure we've all had conversations with people who we can tell when you're talking, they're not really listening, they're just waiting for their turn to talk again. We don't want to be those people, right? We want to be individuals that have an actual dialogue with each other. Okay, and so when we're engaging in that response, right, we are doing it with that critical lens, again, not in a mean-spirited way, but such that we can find any potential weaknesses, faulty reasoning, or unjustified assumptions, that we can make them stronger, right? It's not just about tearing down, but rebuilding, right? We want to swap out those weaknesses for strengths, right? And so we can only really do this by engaging in that criticism. Otherwise, we can't find those weaknesses. And so because of that, we have to engage in this criticism for ourselves as well as others, right? And again, this is what makes it a communal activity, which is hopefully what we'll be engaging in through our weekly discussions. All right, so this leads me to The Value of Philosophy by Bertrand Russell, which is the last chapter of a book he has on the problems of philosophy. And so I like to start off my philosophy courses with this, again, just because I think it helps to clarify what we're doing in the class, as well as gives us a realistic expectation so that we can approach the content in a way that's not entirely frustrating. And so to start us off, just a little bit of a introduction. If you had a chance to look at the media, you might have seen Russell in an interview, but he is your stereotypical philosopher, an old, deceased, white British guy. He's got the elbow patches and the pipe and the British accent. And so, he didn't though live as long ago as some of the ancient philosophers, right? So he's a little bit more recent, but you'll note that even his writing style is a little out of date. So I'll do my best to help walk you through this reading as an example, to also help you get a sense of how to engage in reading philosophical texts, because they can be a little bit difficult if they're written from a long time ago, even if they're written in the same language that we speak natively. So Bertrand Russell himself was a British philosopher, but as I mentioned, with the history of academic philosophy, he did many other things. He was a historian, a logician, a mathematician, as well as a political activist, and he was very prolific. So if you like any of his philosophy, you can pretty much find writings from him on every major area except for aesthetics, for some reason, the theory of art and beauty. Apparently didn't have anything to say about that. I'm not sure why. Didn't have enough time. Didn't have enough time, right? Only so many years in one's life. But one of the other important things to touch upon his influence is with the foundation of analytic philosophy. So after we talk about Russell's paper, we're going to talk about the basic introduction to logic, right? And so this is one of two general ways we can approach the discipline of philosophy, the analytic versus the continental approach. So analytic philosophy is basically the idea that we can assess a philosopher's argument independently of the context in which they lived, right? That the details of their personal life, right, their personal idiosyncrasies, the socio-political goings-on at the time, that while those might provide, interesting details, right, and background, that they are not necessarily used to assess the validity or strength of the argument itself, as opposed to continental philosophy, which makes the exact opposite case, right? Which is that we cannot extract an argument from its context, right? And so we would need to take all those things into account. And so the reason that we are going to be preferring the analytic approach is merely for the purposes of objective grading, right? I have to grade you for this class, and so it's a lot easier to use those mechanisms from analytic philosophy to make sure that that criteria is clear. Okay, so a little bit of history about that. So again, this one, so I'm going to walk you through some of the actual passages from the reading. I won't normally do this, but just to give you a sense again of how we can hopefully unpack some writing that is otherwise a little bit unfamiliar to us. So this is, again, the last chapter in a book he has where he's talked about many problems in philosophy. So he says, having now come to the end of our brief and very incomplete review of the problems of philosophy, it will be well to consider in conclusion what is the value of philosophy and why it ought to be studied. It is the more necessary to consider this question in view of the fact that many people, under the influence of science or of practical affairs, are inclined to doubt whether philosophy is anything better than innocent but useless, trifling, hair-splitting distinctions and controversies on matters concerning which knowledge is impossible. So, what he's saying here, right, is that he has covered a number of problems with the area of philosophy, some of which I have mentioned already, right? It has predominantly been a very undiverse field academically, right? And because of that, certain approaches, right, Western, Christian, and the like, have been preferred over other philosophical disciplines. But there are other issues that philosophy has had just by its very nature of dealing with abstract concepts, right?